It's a real pleasure to be here, and also it's a real honor to be part of the Texas Alliance for Water Conservation and work with you guys. We all realize the importance of water, and we don't have as much as we used to have, and we've got to be more efficient in how we use it. And so we're making some progress with this program, and I look forward to at least another year with it. And I'm getting a whole lot closer to understanding what retirement is, David. So it's been a real pleasure, though. The surface of the earth is about 70% covered by water. And not a whole lot of that is very useful to us until we start desalinizing it for urban use, which is going to happen pretty quickly, I think. Groundwater is only about 0.5%. And we happen to be very fortunate here in the Ogallala area, or we used to be very fortunate that we had the largest underground freshwater supply in the world, I think. And of course, as we all realize, it's rapidly disappeared in the last 60 years. So we've got to use it much more efficiently. Rainfall ranges from 60 inches in the southeast to less than 5 inches as you move west across the U.S. We've got all of our rain coming from the Atlantic, very little coming from the Pacific. And here in Texas, it's basically the same thing. The southeast portion of Texas around Beaumont is about 60 inches of rain, and out in El Paso, it's about 7 inches of rain. The weather data that has existed now for about 100 years, 100-year weather history of Lubbock and so on, we lose 1 inch of precipitation for every 25 miles that we move from east to west. Crosby County gets about 1 inch more than Lubbock County. Lubbock County gets about 1 inch more than Hockman County. Hockman gets about 1 inch more than Cochrane County. So that's been a pretty good thing. As we know, our rains are highly sporadic. The past 3 years, a county road can separate you from a 1/2 inch on one side and blowing dirt on the other side. Hopefully that's going to change. The big problem here in West Texas is the rain, as Jody indicated, is about 18.7 inches on an annual basis, with the summer rains, May, June, July, and August representing almost 70% of that. So that we have the majority of our annual rainfall during the summer months, which is good for summer crops like cotton, and sorghum, and sometimes corn. But the erraticness of the rain is a real problem. It definitely has been the last few years. The other big problem with a lot of our rainfall events is that they are less than 1/2 inch. This year, until here the last couple of days, last couple of weeks actually, in July, we got some very good rains and these rains now, but 70% of our summer rainfall is very small showers. And when that hits the ground and it's bare ground, it evaporates the next day. So it's really not very useful rain. So about 70% of our summer rainfall is less than 1/2 inch. And that is less than effective rain. This is the rainfall in PET for Floydada, for Floyd County, Floydada Mesonet, and the red lines here represent the daily PET, the additive PET. So in May, in Floyd County, the potential ET was over 9 inches. The accumulative rain at that point for May was less than 1 inch. So we evaporated 9 inches. If you had bare soil out there, or if you were sprinkle irrigating and putting on 1 inch, you were losing 2/10 to 3/10 inch a day from bare soil evaporation. And that continues. In June, we were over 9 inches, got a little more rain, about 3.7 inches cumulative. But you can see that we had a couple of decent events right in here. That June 5th hailstorm, most of mine was in solid form on June the 5th rather than in the liquid form. But then we got some pretty decent rains right here. In July, this is the very good month. And starting about the 15th or 16th of July, we've got some extremely good rains across the entire area that put us up here at, in this mesonet, a little over 2 inches, a cumulative 2.5 inches or so. And the PET was a lot lower because of the humidity and the cooler temperature. But this is the Floydada. This is Plainview, about the same pattern. Plainview didn't get much rain at all in May, very little in June, but then capitalized with over 6 inches in July. So the rains have been very beneficial. They fell at a very opportune time for us. We were getting way behind in our irrigation where we had irrigation, and this July rain and now this August rain have brought us back to where we have a pretty good chance of making a really decent crop where we have been able to keep up to some extent. We don't have much of a problem with genetic potential. I contend that we have 5 to better times the yield potential in every crop species we grow compared to our average yields. For instance, the yield, the average or the maximum yield, the highest yield of corn is over 400 bushels. The average yield is 37% of that for corn. These are the factors that affect reduce the average yield. The biotic are things like insects, diseases, and weeds, and that only represents about 10%. The abiotic factors are things like weather and soil properties. Shallow soils, high pH soils, low pH soils, things that we really can't do a whole lot about. And that represents about 52% of the reason that our average yields are only 37% of the record yields. In the case of cotton, we have an average, or our record yield of over 8 bales per acre. The U.S. average is only 875, or 22% of that. I was at a meeting last December with a guy from Arizona out west in the Paloma Ranch, and he made 3,750 pounds of harvestable cotton. I'm not going to tell you how much water he put on it, but it consumed more than 5 fingers on one hand and almost half of the fingers on the other hand, more than half of the fingers on the other hand. That's acre feet, not acre inches. 8 acre feet of water. That's 96 inches. I can farm for 10 years on that with the wells I've got. But it's cheap water in Arizona and California. They have lake water and they've got some well water and stuff, and it's very cheap. So our yield potentials. Tom remembers one of the graduate students I had that I challenged him when he was a senior that he wanted to be a graduate student, and I said, well, the only way I'm going to take you as a graduate student is you've got to grow a cotton plant with more than 100 bolls on it, harvestable bolls. Brian, you may have been there at that time too. And he planted a bunch of HS-26. This was before we had flex cotton and BT cotton and stuff like that. He planted it in his backyard and had individual plants and watered it and fertilized it. And he had several HS-26 plants that made over 150 harvestable bolls per plant. We actually put a bunch of prep on them and entered them in the fair, and they won the best cotton plant by a long shot. So cotton has got a tremendous potential. We harvest out of the first 10 fruiting branches on a cotton plant today, 10 to 11 fruiting branches or 10 to 11 main stem nodes that have fruiting branches represents our harvestable yield in West Texas. And we've got to manage that so it doesn't keep growing and put on a lot of stuff from now on that has no chance of ever making a harvestable boll. We ruin our quality, and then we've got a problem selling it. It won't even meet the E3 requirements by a long shot with low micronair like we had last year with an October 8th freeze. The soil is where the plant gets its water and nutrients. There are two properties of the soil that determine both the water holding capacity and the ability of water to move into and through the soil system. The soil texture is a measure or an expression of the relative amounts of sand, silt, and clay. The more clay you have a clay soil or you have a clay loam. These soils around here, these Pullmans, are clay loams. You get down in our part of the area and we're sandy clay loams. You get further south and we're sandy loams. You get into Gaines County and down into Andrews County, they're sands. They're basically all sand. The clay particles, the clay minerals that are in the soil are electrically charged. They're negatively charged and they hold water molecules water is a polar molecule. The oxygen has a negative charge and the two hydrogens are positively charged. So if you've got a negatively charged clay particle there, the hydrogen attaches to it. Another water molecule attaches to the oxygen in the water and you build layers of water around a clay particle. Sands, the only thing a sand can do is hold water due to surface tension. And that's not a whole lot. Now, sands are important in the soil for porosity, for infiltration. A sandy soil surface, or even a fine sandy loam surface has an infiltration rate of about 1/2 to 3/4 inch per hour. So when we get these thunderstorm type rains, where we get a 1/2 inch in 30 minutes, the sandier soils have an opportunity to absorb that water and move it into the profile. The sands also increase the size of the macropores in the soil, which is important in moving water down through the profile and creating air. A good soil, a well-developed soil, should be 50% solid and 50% airspace. And the water capacity, the water holding capacity of that soil should be that 50% of that airspace is filled with water. So you've got to have quite a bit of clay in there. The clay soil, if you've got a clay on the surface, the kind of rains we probably had last night and the night before where it fell very fast, you've got a lot of runoff. In fact, as I was coming up here, some of the 54 there east of Petersburg was running about 8 inches deep coming out of a playa. So a lot of that water ran off. A lot of water coming out of pivots ran off. Soil structure is the other component of the road. Soil structure is the other component, and this is simply a measure of the aggregation of the particles. Instead of just being individual particles, they form clods. And the structure is the best in native soils. As we do tillage, especially horizontal tillage, we do a lot to destroy the surface of the top, what we call the plow layer, the top 6 inches. Horizontal tillage sears that ground. If it's a little bit of wet, when you're out there running a 16-inch sweep or something, you're sealing off that right below the surface. You're going through it with a harvester. You're compacting those middles. And we've all seen that when we used to row water a lot. The wheel tracks were always a lot shorter. They never got the water that the rows that didn't have the wheel tracks. So compaction is one of the problems we have. And with minimum till or no till, we are getting back to decent types of structure where the porosity is better and water will infiltrate, water will move through the soil. And so these are the two components of the soil that influence the water supply. How much it will hold is dependent upon this, and how rapidly the water will move into and through the soil is dependent upon the structure. Now, can you see the red on there? These are the different soils. This is a clay loam like we have here. Field capacity is that volume of water that the soil will hold against the force of gravity. And in a clay loam, 40% of the volume is water, can be water. So in a foot depth of soil, there's 4.8 inches of water at field capacity. As we move down, we've got a loam, we've got a sandy loam, we've got a loamy sand. You can see that a loamy sand down in Terry and Dawson counties only holds 2.4 inches at field capacity. That's half of what this soil up here holds at field capacity. This is the bottom of that. This is what's called the permanent wilting point. When the plant has extracted all that it can get out by going wilting during the day and not recovering the next morning, that is defined as the permanent wilting point. So in a loam, a clay loam, there's still 2.4 inches of water in that soil per foot of depth when that plant can no longer extract water. Okay? This is the difference between this and this. This is the plant available water, about 2.4 inches in these clay loams. Now that doesn't mean you want to let it draw all 2.4 inches out. Our experience with this has been that it depends on the crop and the rooting system, but in the case of a grass crop like sorghum or corn, it can extract about 60% of this plant available water before it senses any water stress. Cotton's got a very sparse root system. Cotton is about 50 to 55%, so you can extract about 1 3/10 inches or 1 4/10 of this water with a cotton plant per foot of depth. And if you go beyond that, it's going to suffer a little bit of stress. You won't see it wilt, but it will have changed its developmental pattern. The first thing that a cotton plant does is its internodes don't get quite as long. And with the water that we've had this year, and especially the July rain, maybe that would have been a good thing, because we've got a lot of internodes at the top of the plant that are probably 3-4 inches long. And the plant doesn't know that it's going to get a little drier, or that it's don't need to be putting that much energy into internodes, but the fixes and growth regulators are what we need to put on, but it may be a little late now. Crop water use is a function of both the physical conditions and the biological conditions. We have radiation provides the energy to convert liquid water to water vapor. That's a pretty high energy requiring process. Temperature of the air determines the water holding capacity of the air, and the relative humidity is simply an expression of the amount of water vapor in the air relative to the amount of water that air will hold at that temperature. Early in the morning, the relative humidity is high because we're cool air. The dew point is the temperature at which water will condensate out of the air. That's why it's called the dew point. You'll have dew. I've actually seen dew here the last few weeks on some stuff early in the morning, which is very unusual. But that's the dew point. That's the amount of water that is in the air at that particular time. As the air heats up, the relative humidity declines. The actual water content of the air doesn't change, but the amount that can be held does change. It increases as the temperature goes up. Wind speed, we have an abundance of that. You have an evaporating surface like a wet soil or a lake or a green leaf, and there's a high humidity. The relative humidity of the air right above that evaporating surface is essentially 100%. As wind comes along and picks that humid air up and mixes it, it keeps evaporating water. So anytime the wind speed's over 5 miles per hour, you don't have a real heavy, dense vapor layer right above that evaporating surface, so it continues to evaporate. The biological components are the leaf area index. This is simply an expression of the acres of leaves per acre of ground. Okay? And you have stomatic conductance. Every leaf has little pores on it that have to open during the daytime. They open during the daytime to take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. They also, when they're open for photosynthesis, water is evaporated because the inside of the leaf, the airspace in the inside of the leaf is essentially at 100% relative humidity, and the air outside is lesser. So if there's a hole in it, out goes the water vapor. That's called transpiration. Canopy architecture is important. A lot of leaves, like the corn hybrids we grow now, have more vertical leaves. And so a lot of the radiation is reflected off. They're still getting enough to carry on maximum photosynthesis, but they're reflecting some of the energy. Tom's going to probably talk a little bit about infrared sensing and canopy temperatures. And if you've got a high humidity, you go to the southeast where the relative humidity rarely drops below 80%, and those leaves on a bright sunny day are way above air temperature because they can't transpire. Transpiration, evaporation of water is a cooling process. And out here, we have just the opposite. We wish we had a little more humidity, so because the plant can tolerate a little bit more temperature than we have. Now, I can't tolerate these 109-degree temperatures, but it'll do a little better job than it's been doing. This is the equation that's been around. It was developed for determining the rate of water loss from lakes and so on back many years ago. It's called the modified Penman, but the evapotranspiration is a function of the crop coefficient times the water minus the... Anyway, this is an equation that we have built into the mesonet. If you go to the daily summary page for any given day, you will see the potential ET in both millimeters and inches. And so this is an equation that brings into place the potential proper evaporation and evapotranspiration, the temperature-related water factor, the net radiation and equivalent evaporation in millimeters per day, the wind-related function, the vapor pressure deficit, and then an adjustment factor to compensate for the effect of day and night weather conditions. This equation is available to you on a daily basis in the mesonet that you're interested in, the weather station that you're interested in. This is the potential evapotranspiration for the last 3 years at Lubbock, and you can see that we've got a lot of diurnal, or not so much diurnal, but yes, diurnal, but daily PET. The PET is not consistent from day to day, and the temperature, the radiation, the wind speed, the humidity all affect that. So that's the potential evaporating power of the atmosphere. I've got it in millimeters per day. 10 millimeters per day is 4/10 of an inch. 8 is about 3/10 of an inch. 6 is just about 2/10 of an inch, 25/100 of an inch. And you can see that back here in June, we were hitting some 42, 43, 0.42, 0.43 inches per day of evaporation. Lots of evaporating power of the atmosphere. Crop coefficient is a factor that we use to multiply by the potential ET to determine the daily crop water use. And the crop coefficient is the crop water use divided by the potential. In other words, what I just showed you was the potential. So we take the crop coefficient, it's crop specific, and we calculate this term. And it varies with stage of development because of differences in percent ground cover, the leaf area index. Most crops, if we're on 40-inch rows, when they have a leaf area index exceeding 3, then they have covered the ground, and there's very little radiation that's getting to the ground. Essentially, all of the radiation is being absorbed by the plant, and that is contributing to daily water use. At that point in time, when the ground is completely covered and all the radiation is intercepted, that crop is using the potential for that day. This is the leaf area development of corn, sorghum, and cotton, and as a function of days after emergence. And you can see that about tasseling time, corn has a leaf area index of 6. This is the magic line across here, so by the time the corn plant's 45 to 50 days old, it's using pretty close to potential ET. If you're on 30-inch rows, it's definitely covered over at that time. If you're on 40-inch rows, there's still a little space between row-to-row spacing. One of the real advantages of cotton is the fact that it develops leaf area very slowly, and it reaches that critical point right about now, about peak flower. And as a consequence, we can get to this time of the year with using less than potential ET. The problem with the cotton plant is that it develops leaf area so slowly up here at the beginning that all of these little 1/4-inch rains fall on bare soil and they evaporate the next day. So it takes a 1/2 inch or more to put some water into the soil for that crop to use. It's got 1 or 2 days worth of water supply from a 1/2 inch rain. But if we get those thunderstorms where we get 1.5 inches in 30 minutes, it still didn't get but a 1/2 inch of useful water out of that. The rest of it ran off. These are the crop coefficients. We are approaching 1 at about 45 to 50 days in corn, and about the same thing in sorghum. One of the things with sorghum is, in my opinion, the ideal planting time for sorghum is in mid-June. The ideal planting time for corn is either in late April or very early May. So you've got a 6-week difference in when the sorghum plant reaches its maximum time, and by then we're starting to decline in terms of PET. Cotton, on the other hand, again, reaches that 1 or that where it's using full PET about 100 to 110 days after emergence, which is about now. This is the crop water use. This is the average PET over the growing season. This is our average rainfall over growing season. With 23 inches of total water, rainfall and irrigation, we should be able to make 3 bale plus cotton. Sorghum, about 30 inches of water, peanuts about 32, and corn about 37, if we're going to make 200 plus bushel corn. That's the kind of water use that the crop will have here on the South Plains if we're trying to shoot for some high yields. These are the maximum daily crop water use. Again, cotton is about 1/4 inch at this time of the year. That requires 5 gallons per minute per acre. You're going to meet that 1/4 inch per day. Each gallon of water per acre, each 1 gallon per minute per acre is 0.053 acre inches per day. The duration of that period is about 40 days. If we go to corn, it's going to take 0.35 of an inch a day in June when it's got full canopy. That's 7 gallons per minute per acre, and that lasts about 60 days. Sorghum is about 3/10 because we've shifted the planting date to 6 weeks later than corn, at least 6 weeks, and it moves its critical period, its maximum leaf area, into August, and so that takes 6 gallons per minute, but that only lasts about 40 days. We're not going to worry about wheat and peanuts on there. Irrigation frequency is very critical. I need to speed up, don't I? I'm used to teaching 3-hour classes, and that hadn't disappeared. I didn't even give them a restroom break, so bear with me. Irrigation of agricultural crops, volume and frequency is very important. How much you can apply and how frequently you put it out. This is the gallons per minute I just talked about. We have adopted low energy precision application of water on our pivots, where we're concentrating the water on about 30% of the surface area rather than sprinkling where we're wetting 100%. So the only water that's evaporating from this system is the wetting zone right in here. With drip, we're 95 to 98%. The problem I've seen with drip over the past few years is we're probably pushing as much water out of the bottom of the system as we are letting it evaporate with a sprinkler. So we're going to talk a little about that some this, I guess, before we go to the field. We're not going to the field, so it'll be in here. But these crop sensors that are out there